A lot of fingers are getting pointed at a lot of different people in Pittsburgh for the troubles that the Steelers are going through, especially on offense. We talked a lot about what went wrong in the game with Ben Roethlisberger. We're going to talk more about not just the game, but the season and who can step to Ben Roethlisberger to get things to change right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast today. Joining me will be Josh Taylor of local KDKA station and 93.7 The Fan. He'll be joining me here to talk about that today on this Tuesday. And we always appreciate any of you out there that make the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day when you're listening to podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. And also remember, this show is brought to you by RockAuto.com. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit RockAuto.com today and tell them that Locked On sent you. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can download this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and now YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the like button, subscribe to us. It really helps out the show. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star rating with a positive comment, and you get a special shout out at the end of the show. Joining me today is an old friend of the podcast, Josh Taylor, back in the building. Find him on Twitter at Josh Taylor HD. Josh, how you doing, my man?
I'm good, man. It's good to be back talking with you again. It's been a while, but usually when it's me and you, it gets pretty good. So we usually get deep into some stuff. So I'm ready to do it.
We got stuff to get deep into because this offense right now is still playing at an all-time low. They're not putting points up on the board at all. And the thing is that, you know, you could point to this reason or that reason, and you could say it's play calling, you could say it's offensive line, but the bottom line, and as I brought this up in Monday's episode, recapping the game and explaining all the things that are going on, this falls at the feet of Ben Roethlisberger when, you know, in a game where you only got pressured a handful amount of times, in a game where your receivers were open all around, and in a game where your run game was having success, he was the problem. But I ask you this question, Josh, because there's no doubt that that's the case here. Let me, before I go there, do you agree that that's the case, that this is a Ben problem? And, you know, not that there aren't other things that are wrong, but that it starts and ends with his situation.
If you're not acknowledging that there are other problems, then you're just trying to find something to zone in on and just make it that one thing. And very, very seldom, and Chris, you know this as well as anybody, as much as you've covered this sport at so many levels and having played it as you have, you know this, it's very seldom one thing. So yeah, there's multiple problems. But the thing that we're always told when we're talking about football on a global level, whether it's NFL or college, especially those two levels, high school is a little bit different. But NFL and college level, what do we always talk about? It always starts with the quarterback. It begins and ends with the quarterback. Quarterback play is the difference maker. It always comes down to if your quarterback's better than the other guy, you got a shot to win games. And this is the thing that we have to admit to ourselves. The Steelers have played 4 games. They have won one of them. And in only one of those games was their quarterback better than the other guy. And it was the game that they won, and it didn't have as much to do with their quarterback being better as much as it was the other team's quarterback being worse, because the Steelers' defense made that guy's day miserable from whistle to gun. So that's where it is for me. Now, I say all that with the understanding that, yes, he's not in the best position in the world. And you hear it, we've heard it in all 4 game broadcasts if you're watching on TV. He's got a few new starters on the offensive line. Got 4 rookies on the offensive unit. Offensive line, not the best in the world. Some arguing that it's probably worse than it was last season. We hear all those things. However, every coach will tell you that there are ways that you can address maybe having a subpar run game. Maybe you do this differently. If you have a subpar wide receiver, maybe you're doing this differently. If your quarterback's new and inexperienced, maybe you're using this particular part of the playbook, or you're tailoring it to what he does well, or pretty much stuff that he can catch on easily and remember and, keep repeating successfully.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a subpar offensive line, there's a couple things you're probably going to do. You might enact an option game that might slow the defense down, especially on the edges. You might try to find ways to move the pocket, which if you can do that with your quarterback just to make sure, because they can't hit a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
Or on top of all of that, there's another thing you can do, playing off the running game, using play action to freeze the middle of the field and open up the middle of the field. So there's all of these different things that coaches say you can do to overcome certain things. But the Steelers aren't even doing those things.
They aren't.
To overcome those problems. So if that's not changing, and the personnel hasn't changed from coordinator to coordinator, it looks pretty similar to the personnel they used with Todd Haley. A lot of 11 personnel, a lot of 12 personnel. Then you have Randy Fichtner, not a lot of 11 personnel, a lot of 12 personnel. Now with Matt Canada, a lot of 11 personnel, a lot of 12 personnel. Not that that's bad with Matt Canada's offense, but we also know you can mix up the personnel groupings and probably find different ways to make that offense work based on what you're facing, because we've seen Matt Canada do that.
Mm-hmm.
But none of those things have changed. The offensive coordinators have changed. The skill guys have changed. Even the offensive line has now officially changed, and the running backs have changed. One thing remains constant, and it's the one thing that they can't seem to figure out. You tell me.
I take it that one thing is Ben Roethlisberger. Stop skating around and just say it.
It is. The only way I can describe it is that there's nothing else left to point to. There's nothing else left. There's no one else left to point to, because sooner or later, because if you're hearing the same complaints about the offense that you heard 5 years ago, and the guys that were there 5 years ago are no longer here, and you heard the same complaints 3 years ago, and the guys from 3 years ago are no longer here, and you heard the same complaints just a year ago, and a lot of the guys from a year ago aren't here anymore, then what's left?
You're right. I mean, over the past decade with Ben Roethlisberger, we heard that it was, back in the day, it was Bruce Arians because he was calling way too many wide receiver screens. Well, they got rid of Bruce Arians, they got Todd Haley. And then the offense became one of the top 10 units in the NFL. But then when they weren't winning enough playoff games, it was, Todd Haley's not that good of a coach. Ben Roethlisberger's carrying the offense. And then when Antonio Brown, was like, Antonio Brown, he's a head case. He's a problem. He's messing up your team. So Todd Haley, gone. Antonio Brown, gone. Even Le'Veon Bell, because he was asking for too much money, gone. All those guys out. It's just Ben and his boy Randy Fichtner. And then after they saw how bad the offense was with Randy Fichtner, get rid of him too. He was out. Now he's out of there. And now all of a sudden, and then last year you even had with Randy Fichtner, you had the offensive line that wasn't performing well. Well, they got a new offensive lineman, and they're still a work in progress. I'm not saying that the offensive line has been fixed, but they made changes there. And you're right. The one consistent when all the problems are being asked is Ben Roethlisberger. And again, for me, I still don't look at his physical feats, his physical limitations as the problem. It's his head. It's always and you and I have talked about this off air, on air, everywhere for years, is that when the offense struggles, it's not because plays aren't there. It's not because they never stood a chance. It's because Ben Roethlisberger wasn't able to see the field, missed this open guy, wasn't able to follow through on the detail of his work to finish plays and take the plays that are in front of him. And before, it was more coverable because you could say, you know what? I could cover that up with the fact that Ben has a cannon arm, or Ben can escape the pocket, or, even if Terrell Suggs is pulling that man down, he's going to find a way to escape him and create the play. Ben's not that anymore. He doesn't have those kind of physical skills. So now he needs his brain to be on point. And there's some days in this past when his brain, like his processing, has been right on. He's been getting after it. But then there's some days it hasn't been. Now, there's an angle to this, though, that I think is very important from a coaching standpoint, because I know there's a lot of people out there who's like, well, what about the coaches? What can they do? I want to ask that important question in just a minute here. Before we do, I got to remind our listeners about BetOnline. It's that time of the year again with football is back on both college and pro football. The best place to bet online in the world is BetOnline. With a new updated site and interface, there's even more odds, props, and contests at BetOnline, which continues to be the #1 source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today. Receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON, locked on, to receive your bonus upon signing up at BetOnline. With a new updated site and interface, even more odds are available to you. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports, from football to basketball to boxing, right down to horse racing. Don't wait to take advantage of all of the great offers available for the 2021 season at BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Josh Taylor, breaking things down, continue to talk about the offense. But Josh, we got to dive into the coaching aspect of this because, like you said, there's been several offensive coordinators now. This is what now Matt Canada is his fifth, right? It's Ken Wisenhunt, Bruce Arians, Todd Haley, Randy Fichtner, Matt Canada. Yes, that's 5.
Yep, I got 5.
And there's been complaints about the offense with the last 3. But there's a big difference here with this offensive coordinator. And the big difference to me is when you had Todd Haley, he came in the early 2010s. He was an offensive coordinator who worked with Kurt Warner, Larry Fitzgerald. He was a head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. He had an NFL pedigree. He's been in the NFL. He grew up in the NFL. His dad was in the NFL. His dad was with the Steelers. There's a whole bunch of reasons why when he came to Pittsburgh in the 2010s and Ben Roethlisberger where he was in his career, whenever Ben was messing up, missing the throws, not reading the field, Todd Haley could say, and I'm not saying like I was there, but Todd Haley, I imagine, is in a better position to say, "Yo, Ben, pick this up, man. Let's go. We got to see this from you. Let's go." Like I can see him digging into Ben Roethlisberger and Ben Roethlisberger having to say, "Okay, I got to listen because coach is talking there." But when it comes to Matt Canada, as much as, respect to Matt Canada for how he's gotten his way in his career, he's been coaching since the late 90s in college football. And not Nick Saban college football, but like Northern Illinois and Pitt and Maryland and here and there, an offensive coordinator and quarterback coach here. And he just got to the NFL last year as the quarterback coach. Now, he may have a lot of machinations and a lot of schemes and a lot of concepts that look great on paper and look great when they're actually played out. But the problem is, if you can't get through to your quarterback to follow through on those machinations, on those schemes and concepts, and take the plays that are there, and if anytime you try to dig into him, Ben's like, "Why am I listening to this second-year guy in the NFL when I've been in the league since 2004? I'm a 2-time Super Bowl champion. I'm guaranteed to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. What can this man say to me?" Josh, do you see that as a part of the barriers as to what might be going on in Pittsburgh right now?
Absolutely. That's part of the barrier. And here's another part of the barrier. Now, this isn't a Ben Roethlisberger problem. It's a global Pittsburgh perception problem. I have seen, Chris, I could tell you probably at least a dozen times in the last week at least, where I've heard people say, Matt Canada running this offense, it doesn't work. It's terrible. It's a high school offense. I'm like, you mean the same offense that had Pitt scoring 45 a game 5 years ago? That same offense that put Nathan Peterman pretty much in the NFL? That offense that all you Pitt fans that were, every time you say 42-39, you don't realize that was probably because of him? Or anytime you celebrate that win over Clemson in Death Valley when they scored 40 plus again, that was probably because of him. That guy, you're blaming that. It's that guy's fault now. Funny. You loved him 5 years ago. You hate him now. Funny how that works. But I say all that to say this, because you could also say, hey, wait, you mean that offense that even teams like Kansas City and Green Bay are borrowing concepts that he was using 5 years ago? And even teams like Dallas are using some of those concepts, that they're using jet motion and they're using overloaded lines to one side to mix things up. They're using concepts that he was using at Pitt 5 years ago. It's happening in the league. So don't tell me that this offense doesn't work in the league, because there are other teams doing the same things that he was doing before he got here. So that argument, I think, is terrible. For me, what it comes down to is, and I think you're right, I think the quarterback who's been around for nearly 2 decades looks at the guy who's been here for not even 2 full years, and he's saying, I'm going to let this guy tell me what to do. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier. The personnel groupings haven't changed. A lot of the play calls don't look much different, and a lot of the results don't look much different. So you can't tell me that this guy brought in some new offense that apparently doesn't work when the results really don't look that different. I mean, a couple play calls here and there might be different, but the results have not changed. A lot of the plays that are called have not changed. The depth of the plays being called have not changed because Matt Canada was not the offensive coordinator last year, but for some odd reason, this offense still doesn't like throwing that far down the field. The majority, and I mean the vast majority of plays being called, pass plays, are either short of the line of scrimmage or just a couple yards past. We're putting that on him now because that was a problem last year. It's really hard for me to say, oh, it's this guy's offense not getting it done when you look at the fact that we've, like you said, this is his fifth coordinator in his career. And we've heard some of the same complaints and some of the same excuses. And now we're trying to find someone else to pin this on. Sooner or later, we have to look at the fact that, hey, and this is nothing, it's not a bad thing because when you've been a quarterback in the NFL for that long, you've had that much success, coaches are going to cater to what you want to do. There's something that I read, and I thought this was a great piece. They were talking about the Chargers offense and how that offensive group, those offensive coaches came from New Orleans. And they would have meetings with Drew Brees, and they would go through the scripts of plays. And they had this thing called a dot meeting where the quarterback would come in and just dot the plays that he liked. These are the ones that he wanted to run that day because they had a certain list of plays.
That's very interesting.
Whatever ones the quarterback liked, he picked those, and those are the ones they ran. And they want to do the same thing in LA with Justin Herbert with the Chargers. Justin Herbert's not a veteran guy, but it's a concept that coaches are coming to. Hey, run the plays your quarterback's comfortable with. So even if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say maybe this situation's happening, does it fall on the offensive coordinator after all? Either way you look at it, it kind of comes back in the same direction.
And again, I get we don't have the all 22 yet. That comes out 48 hours or whatever after the game. But just looking at the film, at the broadcast camera angles, I saw several receivers that were open and the concepts that were there for NFL throws to be made. I mean, again, we're not asking for Ben Roethlisberger to become Aaron Rodgers. That's not what the Steelers are trying to do. No, they're trying to make him say, hey, just lead Juju here, or hit this guy who's 5 yards in front of you, and then not and not bracketed. He's not being asked to make elite throws. He's just being asked to be consistently decent. That's all they're asking. And if you occasionally hit a Deontay deep ball, good, good job. But that's not where the bread and butter of Ben Roethlisberger's success has to come from, is seeing what the defense is doing, recognizing it, and attacking that weak spot when the Steelers want to throw the ball. Otherwise, this isn't going to go well. And it's going to look a lot like it did against the Packers. And we're, again, back to coaching. How do you get him to recognize that? How do you dig in him to say, hey, man, this is where you're coming up short? Is that something that Ben Roethlisberger can go through? And maybe, we're talking about Matt Canada, maybe this comes down to Mike Tomlin. Now, as you mentioned, when you have a franchise quarterback for this long, and you have and you have a guy that that you respect and that you have this long time working relationship with, Mike Tomlin knows how to kind of work with different personalities. And to me, that's one of the biggest skills you can have as a head coach. Not your X's and O's per se. Like Chuck Noll wasn't a X's and O's guru. He was a master of knowing how to treat Terry Bradshaw compared to Joe Green, to Lynn Swann, to Jack Lambert. He knew how to whip that team up and get it going. Mike Tomlin has been that. He kept Antonio Brown in this organization for 9 years until we all saw how crazy he was as soon as he was let go, and how things, like the Raiders couldn't keep him for more than a month. That was ridiculous. But Mike Tomlin, he's a leader of men, as many of his players have called him. He has their respect. A lot of times, and Chuck Noll did the same thing. Chuck Noll would address Terry Bradshaw a lot softer than he would address, any other players. And the players often said, we didn't like how he babied Terry Bradshaw, but we understood it when we saw Bradshaw's success. That's just how you had to reach him. Now, I'm not saying Tomlin's babying Ben, but I've seen Tomlin get into the face of Marquise Pouncey. I've seen him get in the face of Devin Bush, TJ Watt. I've seen him challenge all his different players. I've never seen him get up in Ben's face, even in Ben's younger years, in their first years together. I've never seen him get up in Ben's face and be like, "This is on you. You got to do this." I've seen him grill Marquise Pouncey. He's like 5'3", look at me, and like demand that attention from him and for his player and Marquise Pouncey, an all-pro center, to shut up and listen to what I'm saying to you as a coach. I've seen that I've never seen him do it to Ben, but it might be because Ben don't respond to that. And Jimmy, and, for people like, well, any coach would do that. Bill Belichick, look at what's happened with Tom Brady. Now Tom Brady's won Super Bowl somewhere else and coming into Foxborough and beating him. Jimmy Johnson said, once said when he was asked, well, you treated Emmitt Smith just like everybody else. He's like, no, I didn't. That was Emmitt Smith, the best running back I've ever coached. I treated him like the best running back I've ever coached. And if he wanted something, we said, yep, Emmitt, we'll get it for you.
53 different styles for 53 different guys. That's how you looked at it.
And it's knowing how to respond to that. And Mike Tomlin, I think, has done a fantastic job of doing that with Ben Roethlisberger over the years. Whether he, when Ben's gotten snippy with the media, when he said things that you're like, I'm not so sure about if that injury news is true or not. But he's done that. Now the question is there enough that he can do right now to get Ben to pull out of whatever funk that he's in his brain? Because again, I maintain his arm. It isn't consistent enough. He may not have that together, but it would be a lot easier on him if he were able to take the easy throws that were there, and significantly more often than not, that's not what's happening.
I'm going to add this in here too for good measure, because I thought you brought up some great examples, and I had Jimmy Johnson ready to go before you said it. I was going to come back with that. I'm going to add this too, because I'm glad you mentioned Mike Tomlin and how he's revered as a coach by players. When you're getting ready to face the Packers in Lambeau, and Aaron Rodgers is doing an interview and is asked a question that wasn't really related to Mike Tomlin, it was just related to the Steelers, and he goes on a good 30 to 40 seconds to talk about how much he likes and respects Mike Tomlin completely unprompted, and how he handles his teams as a coach and how he talks to them, and you hear other players tell him, hey, he treats us like men. You even hear him when he addresses players. He'll say, men, it's time to go do this, or men, it's time to go get ready for this, or men, we got a challenge on our hands. So when you hear Aaron Rodgers, of all players in the world, say something like that unprompted, not led with that question. And a lot of times in those interviews, you try to lead guys with certain things because you know there's certain things they're not going to want to talk about. He wasn't led in that direction. He went there on his own.
And
when a guy like that says it, that says a lot.
It does. And to bring clarity, I just wanted to read the quote so Steelers fans know what we're talking about. Aaron Rodgers said this, and this is what Josh was referencing. He says, it's a lot of respect. I haven't spent time with him, Mike Tomlin, but I've watched him from afar for a long time, and I have a lot of respect for him. I just enjoy the way that he talks about his players. I've had some friends play over there, and the stories are very consistent with the kind of day-to-day coach that he is. I like his demeanor. I think he fits the Iron City perfectly, and I have a lot of respect. Josh, I mean, that's exactly what you're saying there. That respect, Mike Tomlin has that. Looks like we might have lost Josh for a second there. We will keep it rolling here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. When we get back, Josh, in a second, I want to get his thoughts in response to that, because we are having some technical problems here, but before we keep it moving here, we do have to remind you about our sponsors, RockAuto.com. Save time and money when using RockAuto. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump may be $353 from the chain store, but it's only $216 from RockAuto. RockAuto is a family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. RockAuto prices are reliable for every customer. They have everything you could need, from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in how did you hear about us box so that they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today and tell them that Locked On sent you. back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Josh, we lost you there for a sec, man. I know that Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook went down, but I was like, oh no, they got us too.
Yeah, they came after us, man. They're getting everybody. There was a quick minute when Twitter started to glitch out. That's also happened. So yeah,
if Twitter goes down, the world's over, man. I'm just
sounds like we're having some connection issues.
I think we're still having some connection issues. Listen, man, if the world does end, I got my Built Bars, bro. I can survive. I can survive for a good month or so off of that before I got to start scavenging. So we gonna have a good supply here. But Josh, we were talking about Aaron Rodgers. I just wanted to finish your thoughts on just his comments about Tomlin and just the respect that Tomlin seems to have across the NFL.
Yeah, there's guys who have who didn't start their careers with this team but have either come to this team later, played against this team, and they're like, man, I love Mike Tomlin. Joe Hayden was one of those guys. When Joe Hayden was brought here, he said, I wanted to play for Mike Tomlin since I came out of Florida. And if you remember back that far, they actually really liked Joe Hayden coming out of Florida. And Mike Tomlin said, well, we really liked him. We just knew we couldn't get to him because he was going to get drafted so high. And he did by Cleveland before the Steelers can get their hands on him. Minka Fitzpatrick was another guy that said, yeah, I wanted to play for Mike Tomlin coming out of Alabama. And Mike Tomlin said, we really liked him, but we knew we wouldn't be able to get a shot at him because he's getting drafted so high. And somehow, some way, two really bad teams decided, yeah, we don't want these guys anymore. And the Steelers said, we'll kindly take them. But those were two guys who really, really wanted to play for Mike Tomlin. And there's more than that. But those are the two recent ones that come to my mind as far as players across the league who have been outside of this organization and came into this organization. And he was one of the main reasons why.
Certainly. And you talked about some defensive players there. I wanted to get your thoughts on the defense because we spend a lot of time talking about the offense, and rightfully so. The offense is the worst part of the team right now, and the defense is doing everything it can. I felt that the one thing that you could take away from the defense from last year, well, a few things that you could last week that you could, or excuse me, Sunday. There was a lot of talk about the Steelers quitting against the Bengals. I didn't see any quit in the defense in this week. They were out there forcing turnovers on downs. They were out there forcing fumbles and recovering fumbles in the fourth quarter, trying to get the offense every opportunity it could to get back in the game. But still, you wanted to see more from this defense. You were hoping that they'd create some more splash plays. Minka Fitzpatrick having a pass bounce off of his fingertips, when he could have intercepted it. TJ Watt recording 2 sacks, but, kind of incidental sacks. One where, maybe you call him for tripping, but honestly, he should have been called. The guy should have been called for holding several times throughout the game. Like this, that, here or there. But not enough of those splash plays. And granted, you're playing Aaron Rodgers. He's an elite quarterback. He's not going to give you that many chances to do that. But still, I wanted to get your thoughts on where this defense is. There's a lot of people saying that this defense is highly overrated and that it's being, there's too much respect being given to it. I actually disagree with that because I see, the last 2 games, they were really hurt up and they were trying to deal with that. In this game, they were up against a really good offense with their backs against the wall, and they didn't play their best, but I thought they hung in there enough to give the offense chances to win the game.
I hear way too many things that don't make sense from time to time when it comes to this team. But the two that I hear a lot that I'm going, okay, those really don't make sense if you're paying attention. One is I keep hearing the question, how did this team beat Buffalo? Let's see. A healthy Tyson Alualu, a healthy TJ Watt, a healthy Alex Highsmith.
Double check.
And there was someone else. Who else am I missing? There was a 4th guy in that group too that was healthy.
Well, Devin Bush was out for Devin Bush and Joe Hayden.
So those guys were all healthy because it was the first game of the season. Everybody was healthy, and that entire unit played out of its mind. And they were able to get pressure with 4 guys continually. And for some odd reason, if Cam Hayward wasn't in Josh Allen's face, TJ Watt was in Josh Allen's face. If TJ Watt wasn't in Josh Allen's face, Alex Highsmith was in Josh Allen's face. And if Alex Highsmith wasn't there, Melvin Ingram was there. Or Tyson Alualu was there. But all those guys were getting after Josh Allen. All that entire game, they were able to rotate those guys. Those guys stayed fresh, and they were able to bring consistent pressure every single snap they were on the field. And they played a lot of snaps against Buffalo, but they still played consistently well across the board. That's why they beat Buffalo, because their defense was fantastic for the way they played against that offense, plus the special teams contributed. Now, let's go back to Sunday against Green Bay. The defense had chances to make plays, like you mentioned. There's 17 points that could have changed in this game. One of them coming from that missed interception for Minka Fitzpatrick. And now here's one thing I heard that made a ton of sense to me. I had a bunch of people saying, you can't let Aaron Rodgers have that opportunity back. You can't let him have that throwback. And I totally agree. This is a guy you can't give an extra chance to because he will make you regret it. And he did. That led to the first touchdown drive. Because an interception there, especially when I believe that's when they had the lead. I think they had a 7-0 lead when that play happened.
They did.
So no chance to stop them from tying the game. And I say this all the time. A team with a 2-possession lead is the most dangerous team in football. Because even if you slip once, you still get the ball back, and they got to get the ball back to score and tie you. So you were in the driver's seat. They had a chance to get the ball back with the 1-possession lead, possibly make it 2, and really be in the driver's seat in this game again, like they were in Buffalo. They could have done that again, but that interception did not happen. Then there is the phantom offsides call on the field goal block, which I don't call myself an expert on the rules. I don't call myself an expert on video, but I can't find a single person who is that says Joe Hayden or Minka Fitzpatrick were offsides. They moved when the ball moved. And when you have 4 guys that are all next to each other, that all move when the ball moves, that means those 4 guys all did their jobs.
Yep.
And that penalty flag was thrown because those 4 guys all did their jobs way too well. That's not a penalty. That's doing your job well. That's another thing that's
and I know that some of the procedural things that people complained about, like, well, they couldn't challenge it, or the booth couldn't challenge it because you can't challenge an offsides call. But right. I maintain this is if I saw the play the way it happened, I would have said, you know what, as officials, we pick up this flag, and because it's a scoring play, we can review it, and that would have been it would have been a much more sensible way and a fair way to say, like, you know what, hey, Packers, we're not saying that they definitely wasn't offsides, but this way we're giving both teams a shot there. Now, again, that wasn't the reason the Steelers lost the game, but it did play a huge part of it. And those are the type of plays you pay Minka Fitzpatrick to make. And he made it, and it was taken away. Now, granted, he could have had that other interception that we were talking about. Maybe the Steelers get a little bit more pressure than they did. But I say this: when you're going up against a team with Aaron Rodgers and as many weapons and assets that the Packers have on offense, it's a tall task to ask them to play like the way they did against the Bills and Josh Allen for an entire game, especially when your only offensive backup was really the first drive of the game and the next to the last drive of the game.
And how many times have we heard, Chris, about Mike Tomlin talk about playing complementary football? How many times have we heard that? It's not a coincidence. And I've had this one thing where I've had this theory for a long time. If you want to know if what a coach says is registering with the players, check and see if they're saying the same things. I remember asking David DeCastro this question. I want to say this was good 2-3 years ago. I'm in the locker room. I asked him this question. And David DeCastro mentioned about playing complementary football. When he mentioned that and how we got to do better getting drives where the defense gets us the ball, when they get us a ball for turnover, we got to get points off of it. Or if they get a big stop, when they could have given up a touchdown, but they limit it to a field goal, we got to get points off that and reward them for that. He just kept saying it. We have to reward the defense for when they make plays and give us opportunities to score and win games. And I'm sitting there going, hey, I've heard that before. Oh, wait, it came from the head coach, which led me to believe what Mike Tomlin was saying made sense and it registered with these guys, and it was something that they focused on. I remember 6-7 years ago producing for Ike Taylor's radio show. And I remember this game particularly.
My man is flexing, by the way. He's talking about I'm producing with this guy's radio show. I'm hanging out with David DeCastro. Next thing you're gonna be like, I was drinking with Barack Obama. Like,
I mean, I'm not that connected. Just so happened I worked with some good people. But I wouldn't mind it because just saying. I have some questions about the left-handed jumper, but that's beside the point. But it's one of those things where it's anecdotal. When you hear guys that have played on this team for this head coach say these things and it resonates. I remember, I want to say it was the 2014 season when they went on the road and played the Jets and lost to Mike Vick running that offense. And Ike Taylor said, going into that week, he said, Mike Tomlin told us, look, we're going against a team that we can't make a lot of mistakes. He said, you got a couple All-Pros on the offensive line. You got a Pro Bowl quarterback. You got a Pro Bowl running back, probably a Hall of Famer in LaDainian Tomlinson. We cannot give these guys extra opportunities to get the ball because they're going to wear us out. He said, we went in there and we made mistakes and they wore us out. We did exactly what he told us not to do. So it ain't on him. So when you hear players saying that, hey, the coaching staff has told us what we need to do and we're not doing it, we need to pay attention. We need to listen to it because they're trying to give us, and they give us breadcrumbs every once in a while. We just have to follow them. You have to follow those clues, those context clues that they give you of, hey, this is what we wanted to do. They told us we needed to do this. We didn't get it done. And you start to figure out, wait, this theory that someone shoots out of nowhere on Twitter makes no sense. Or this theory that this radio host shoots out of nowhere makes no sense because the coaches and players are telling us different and you have the evidence to prove it. Which comes back to what you're saying. You're facing a guy like Aaron Rodgers, and it's not like Aaron Rodgers is Zach Wilson or even Josh Allen for that matter. He's been in this league for a decade and a half. We know who this guy is. We know what he's capable of doing. So when you give this guy extra opportunities because you can't keep your foot on his neck or get out ahead of him, if you got a 2-possession lead over Aaron Rodgers, you were in the best position possible. Go talk to Tampa Bay in the NFC Championship game about having that kind of lead on Aaron Rodgers and how much it benefited them because it was rare last year. There's a reason why the man won the MVP award last season. It makes a lot of sense when you add it all up. So with this defense, and you're right, we couldn't expect them to play the way they played against Buffalo because they weren't in the same shape they were where they were against Buffalo. That's why they beat Buffalo, because that was the best performance we've seen from them all year because all things were equal. But after you get past game one, all things are no longer equal. You have to go with the guys that you have. And I will agree with this. They probably didn't give the best effort that they could have had, probably didn't have the results that we would want. But for what this defense has had to deal with, what they've had to go through, and how they've had to respond, I can't put the blame on them because, yes, there were opportunities to make plays that didn't happen. And then there were plays that were made, like that blocked field goal attempt, that they weren't rewarded for. You can't blame them for that. They did their jobs. Right. And it kind of leads to the other thing I've been hearing, and it's just like, oh, well, this defense is overrated. They're not that good. And I'm sitting there going, you remember what happened against Buffalo last year and how they handled Buffalo this year? 2 different games, 2 different outcomes. And that's not even counting the offense's effort. We're just talking defense and special teams here and how those 2 games look different. I don't see many games from this team as frequently in the last few years where the defense actually dictates how things go. You can make the argument Indianapolis maybe a couple seasons ago where Minka Fitzpatrick almost by himself and the defense dictated how things were going to go. But they needed those games. They needed that game against the Chargers 2 seasons ago when they had Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges playing quarterback. They needed the defense to dictate those games because you knew the offense wasn't going to. But you can't expect that every time they're on the field, especially when you're playing a team like this who's got the reigning MVP in Aaron Rodgers, who has probably the best receiver in the league that no one talks about in Devontae Adams. And you have an offense that's that efficient, you can't expect that every time out. So there is a level of expectation that you have, but there's also a level of reality of, hey, you're not at full strength, and this team has a lot of good guys on the other side. As Mike Tomlin says, the other team is varsity as well.
Man, lots of great points from you there, Josh. You and me could chop it up at any point in time. Well, we are out of time here. We gotta keep it moving. But I wanted to just say thank you so much for hopping on the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's always a pleasure to have you here with us. Josh, let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Every platform you can think of: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Josh Taylor HD. That's the best place to find me on social media. On the TV side, CBS Pittsburgh, otherwise known as KDKA TV. Mostly Friday, Saturday nights is where you can find me. I'm actually working a rare weeknight this week coming up here, doing some evening work here, filling in for Bob Pompiani, so I'll be there. Radio, 93.7 The Fan, usually on Sunday mornings. Coming up the next few weeks will be Sundays at 10 a.m. Now that baseball's kind of eased back, I'm getting back into my normal 10 a.m. schedule again. So Sunday mornings, 10 a.m., 93.7 The Fan. We'll leave it there for now because there's a bunch of different stuff.
Like, hey man, I feel you. As people know me for wearing a lot of hats, but you've been a master at juggling a lot of different things at all times. Thanks so much, Josh, for coming up back on the show. We always appreciate you here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. If you want to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, it's at Carter Critiques below, just like Josh's handle is below his name. Remember, the Locked On Steelers podcast is on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like this video. Really helps us out. Also, subscribe to our Apple podcast. When you do, leave us a 5-star rating with a positive comment, and you get a shout out at the end of the show. We'll be back tomorrow. We didn't get Tony today. We are going to get Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're going to have some good talk on some football with the Steelers with him and get his insight on the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see you then.